Morning everyone, and welcome to Learn With Lorna 42. I'm just going to do my normal and wait a few minutes for people to join. Morning Carolyn. Morning Eleanor. So welcome to Learn With Lorna. I hope you've all had a good week since I last spoke to you. I've had a bit of an awful week. Didn't know if I would be here, but I am here and you're here, and that's excellent. Welcome, as I say, to the 42nd Learn With Lorna. Thank you for joining me last week and all your lovely comments. And it was really nice. We looked last week at the collection of one individual, a lady called Margaret McDougall. And it was lovely as well to be joined by a member of her family for that, which was really nice to read afterwards. Oh, nice to see all your comments coming up. People watching all over the place. No snow on Skye, lucky you. And Leslie, you cited the talks in your PhD application. I love that. Thank you so much. That's amazing. That's made my week better. Before I go on to talk about this week's subject, my usual introduction that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, please do so. It's so much appreciated. And again, thank you so much to those of you who have done so. And I know a few donations have been coming in the last week, so I'm really grateful for that. It really does mean a lot to us. As you'll know, if you've been watching these talks for any length of time, you'll know that the Highland Archive Service has 4 offices. We have the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, Skye and Lochailsh Archive Centre in Portree, Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, and Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick. And as you'll know, I'm trying to pull some collections and information from different offices and different subjects. And this week's is coming from the collections at Nucleus in Caithness, but the subject matter relates to all of the northern counties. If you follow Nucleus's Facebook page, you'll have seen that they've been recently doing a feature on Operation Snowdrop. And so if you are interested, having read this, please do, having heard this talk, then please do go back and look at their Facebook page. And also there will be a blog coming up on it on their website as well, but I'll come back and talk about that at the end. As you'll know, the talks that I've done through this series have focused on some on specific collections, such as Hetty Munro, Fraser Tytler, Cameron of Lochiel, and some have focused on specific subjects, such as World War I or Jacobites or whatever it may be. And this week's focuses on a subject from across the collection, so it's not looking at one particular collection, it's looking at a subject. And I've done it this week to tie into the fact that it's an anniversary. It happened in this month, maybe the next few days of this month, some years ago. I'll come back to that in a second. And also, it is a subject in living memory. So if there's anyone watching who remembers Operation Snowdrop, please do comment, or you have memories of other particularly heavy winters, then please do comment and talk about that. Nice to see all your comments coming in. Yes, it is topical, very snowy. No, Jenny, I didn't expect you would have snow on the Sunshine Coast. Do you ever? I don't know. Okay, so we find ourselves, of course, in the middle of winter, and in the Highlands here we've had lows of about -15 degrees centigrade just recently. We've had a big snowfall today. And as someone who has to do an essential journey later, I can tell you I'm delighted about that. But we've had a lot of snow everywhere, and in Spain as well this year, a little bit less normal. But it's been a while since we've had a very, very severe winter. And that's what today's talk is about. If there's anyone watching in Canada, anywhere like that, who might like to comment about their severe winters, that would be interesting too. So 1955 is Operation Snowdrop. It was one of the most severe winters in living memory. From the 10th of January 1955 onwards, 66 years ago, there were huge and unrelenting snowstorms across the north of Scotland. Storms of snow, of wind, of drifts. Heavy snowfall began from the 12th of January onwards. And within one day, the roads across the northern counties were blocked. Almost every road in Caithness, a lot in Sutherland, a lot in Ross-shire as well. Snowdrifts were happening. Now that, of course, is not uncommon in the Highlands. We have snowdrifts often, but these were snowdrifts of about 30 feet, which is about 9 metres. So a very substantial level of snow. And nearly the whole of the north of Scotland, north of the Caledonian Canal, was affected. And as I was jotting down these notes, I thought it was really interesting how many times in our history that line of the Caledonian Canal, which cuts so distinctly across Scotland, how often that line has been a barrier between a border, a boundary between things happening. You may remember in the First World War talk that was the line between the protected area and the rest of Scotland. And so in this particular winter, it was almost a line north of the Caledonian Canal that was affected by this very intense snowfall. And the situation became so bad that the county officials across Sutherland, Caithness and Orkney requested help to distribute food and other essential items to the rural communities. It's great seeing some of your memories coming in here. That's just what I was hoping for. So they needed help to distribute food and supplies to these rural communities. So how did that work? Well, I wanted to read to you, as you've, 1955, Jenny, was the year it was. I've said on several weeks that rather than me trying to formulate this into my own words, sometimes it's better for me to read the words of the people who were there at the time. And so I wanted to read to you a section of a letter written by the Chief Constable, John Georgeson, describing Operation Snowdrop. So I'm going to start by reading that to you. So this is written from the Chief Constable's office in Wick, the 9th of February 1955. And he's writing to the County Council of Caithness. Operation Snowdrop. I have the honour to submit for your information my report on the recent heavy snowstorms which affected the northern counties of Scotland and which culminated in the special drive to combat ensuing hardships, ultimately known as Operation Snowdrop. To get a true background picture of the situation which developed, I have referred to the meteorological office at Wick Airport. The records of this office show that on 10th January there were frequent showers of snow accompanied by a fresh northwest wind. These conditions continued on the 11th, when there was some drifting through the day. On the 12th, there was a continuous snowfall from 1:30 a.m. till 6 a.m. with considerable drifting, and again from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. and afterwards there were intermittent snow showers. In the afternoon of this day, the wind increased to gale force strength, with an average velocity of 46 miles per hour, but reaching at times 69 miles per hour. By 2 o'clock, conditions were serious. Visibility was down to almost nil. All the roads in this county and in Sutherland were blocking up. The railway line was blocked at Bower, and considerable alarm was being felt by many people for the safety of school children, even in Wick Borough itself, some of whom were almost overcome on their way to after-lunch classes. Headmasters in the primary schools decided to send the children home as quickly as possible, and in this police officers on foot and in patrol cars fully cooperated, being engaged for the whole afternoon in escorting or transporting pupils to their destinations. In some cases, the smaller children had to be carried through the drifts several feet high. Police officers also assisted in transporting country pupils from Wick High School to hotels in the town. At about 2 p.m, a BEA passenger plane on the Kirkwall-Wick Dice flight landed at Wick Airport with 19 passengers on board. Conditions were then at their very worst, and the plane was soon engulfed in snowdrifts, with the result that the passengers had to remain at the airport. The plight of these people was not reported to the police until well on in the evening, and it was then decided that an endeavour should be made to have them brought into town. A snow to partially clear the roads, the Noss Road as far as the airport, and a tractor, a roads department car, and a police patrol car succeeded in reaching the marooned passengers, and in several journeys brought them into town. On the 13th, the severe conditions continued. Snow fell heavily for part of the day, and there was continuous drifting, especially in the afternoon. However, it was possible to get rail traffic moving late that night, and the first train arrived at Wick from Georgemas Junction at about 1 o'clock the next morning. By Saturday the 15th, the weather having improved only slightly in the meantime, persons residing in isolated areas were experiencing difficulties. And on the morning of that date, I was informed by the county clerk that a request for foodstuff had been received from the isolated district of Braemore in this county, and that he had arranged to have supplies dropped by aircraft. So you can see the picture building of the roads becoming blocked, the snow continuing. It starts with that initial reaction of let's get the children home from school, get them safe. So it's an initial reaction. But then the longer problem of within a few days, people are starting to struggle for food. People are needing resources and supplies. And it's interesting, it's obviously a totally different situation from the one we're living through with COVID, but there are similarities of that sudden feeling of isolation, and how do you get things if you can't get out? And then we all become very much more reliant on each other very quickly. So as that report mentioned, on the 15th of January, the county clerk of Caithness received a call that there were food shortages in Braemore. Now, Braemore is 14 miles from the nearest village. And so in those kind of conditions, that's a very substantial distance. And so the county clerk called in the RAF in Kinloss and asked for advice on what to do. And so I want to read you an extract from the county clerk's report of this situation. He says, the storm started on Monday the 10th of January, but it wasn't until the Wednesday that we got a heavy snowfall. The roads all became completely blocked that day. On the following Saturday, I got the first call for assistance. It was from inhabitants of Braemore for foodstuffs. They were speaking from a kiosk and stated that they were short of food and asked me what could be done. I questioned them about being short so soon, as the roads had only been blocked up since Wednesday, but they explained that they'd been expecting a van on Wednesday, but the snow had prevented it from calling, and their last van had been prior to the end of the year. As Braemore is 14 miles from the nearest village and the road was not likely to be opened for some time, I'd felt that something must be done about this. I accordingly asked the caller to call back from the kiosk in 3/4 of an hour. I got hold of the welfare officer and requested him to contact first the BEA office opposite the county offices in Wick, and then failing them, RAF Kinloss, to see if they could do anything. Kinloss, through Group Captain R.B. Thompson, station commander, responded at once and said that they would land foodstuffs at Braemore almost immediately, so that when Braemore came back on the phone again, I told them that they would have supplies within about 2 hours. I made arrangements with them about the identification of the landing field and the signals, of which Kinloss was at once informed. In point of fact, they got their supplies at 1:30 p.m. that day, and the aircraft made a further drop the next day, Sunday. Within an hour of having arranged with Kinloss, a telephone call came from Lieutenant Commander Henley, RNAS, at Lossiemouth, through the roads department, stating that 2 helicopters were available there and would be glad to help. I rang back immediately to say that while we had no further calls at the moment, we would be glad to accept their offer in the event of further calls coming in. Later on that day, Lossiemouth phoned to say that the 2 helicopters were coming to Wick to be on hand, and I phoned the police to let them know. And he goes on to say, he goes on to say that how grateful he is to the police for their support. And he says they did their work magnificently. I can't speak highly enough of the work of the Chief Constable, who attached himself to support the naval personnel, Inspector Neil Sutherland, who was in charge of the police headquarters. So all the messages came into the headquarters and then were organised and the supplies distributed. And he also goes on to say how many people in the community were of a support and were of a help to him. And as I say, a very interesting comparison to the situations we're in at the moment. I'm seeing your messages there coming up, Jenny, that you can't imagine what it's like to not be able to get food due to snow. Well, I'm sure someone who's watching will be able to testify that this is still a frequent thing. But obviously, we prep for that and keep things in tins and stored up and things like that. But of course, the communication is the thing that's really changed. So that was where we got up to in the first few days of the storm. Food obviously becomes the initial problem. It's food supplies that are needed. But then on the 17th, we go into a further problem. There's a phone call that comes in from a remote or a distant community, an isolated community, who says that they have need of a coffin. Somebody in the community has passed away and they can't get hold of a coffin. But of course, a coffin wouldn't fit into the helicopter. But fortunately, on that same day, reinforcements arrived. And they came in the form of an aircraft carrier, HMS Glory, which anchored in the sea Loch Eriboll, which, if you remember, if you were watching World War II, Loch Eriboll has always played an interesting part. It was where it had earlier seen the surrender of German U-boats during World War II. And it has the advantage of being a very deep sea loch, so obviously comes inland, but with a connection to the sea. And so the purpose of HMS Glory when they came into Loch Eriboll was to provide support to central and northern Sutherland. And so the police wrote on that day that on the 17th of January, the aircraft carrier HMS Glory, with large supplies of food on board, anchored in Loch Eriboll in the north of Sutherland. And helicopters based on this vessel carried out reconnaissance and food dropping sorties all over west, northern and central Sutherland. Reconnaissance planes from Kinloss also flew over Orkney and parts of Caithness, Sutherland and Rothshire and dropped food supplies to 10 different places over a wide area. Excuse me. In addition, aircraft from this station dropped a total of over 17 tonnes of animal fodder in the 4 counties. It will thus be seen that the situation was dealt with from these 3 points, from Wick Airport, from the aircraft carrier HMS Glory, and from Kinloss, each working separately but in close harmony with the others. And they talk about the issues that provides. They then need to fuel the aircraft. So when they have all these helicopters going out and flying sorties, they need to get fuel for those and they need to equip the people who are working on them. And we have lists of the supplies that were dropped. So obviously I've mentioned food, but what else was dropped? So there are lists of these sorties, lists of the trips and lists of what happened in them. And it's really interesting. In total, these support teams, I mentioned several of them, they carried out nearly 100 drops of food and supplies. And as I've mentioned, that includes animal fodder, tinned food, things like that. But also, they had to carry out medical trips. I'll come back to that in a wee second. So here's some examples from the list. 16th of January, trip to Force, Thurso, to return a nurse. 18th of January, Melvick and Betty Hill to deliver food and medical supplies and the mainline fuses for the hydroelectric board. So these are huge things that are having an effect on the fuses for the mainline for the hydroelectric board. That's substantial. Eleanor, yes, they did get the coffin. Seen your question coming in. 18th, trip to Helmsdale, uplift of radiator for snowplough from Helmsdale railway station. 19th, Stenster, reconnaissance flights. Leibster, 19th, delivering mail. 20th, Wick, attempting to rescue sheep. And you'll maybe have seen that. Those are fantastic images of the aircraft, the helicopters lifting sheep, because the snow was so deep that the sheep were sinking into it. And that's something I think, I don't know if there's anyone watching with more knowledge than me, but I think that's still an issue, that if they sink in and the snow falls on them, they'll just get suffocated by the weight of the snow. And so these are, the helicopters were lifting the sheep out of the danger of the snow. Before I go any further, I'm aware of the time, so I'll do a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, that High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. Okay, so what did they deliver? The aircraft and boats from HMS Glory alone, so just the ones that came, the small boats and the aircraft that came out of HMS Glory, they delivered items including, absolutely not limited to, but including 252 tins of milk, 268 tins of corned beef, 670 pounds of bread, 560 pounds of potatoes, and of course all sorts of other foodstuffs, as well as paraffin, candles, animal fodder, especially hay, a huge amount of hay being distributed, because of course the animals won't be able to get any of the things they would normally be able to reach, the grass and so on. There's also a note that on the 21st of January, there was a special supply of dog food sent to Rhodes Cottage, Altnahara, Sutherland. That's all I've been able to get on that. So if anyone can tell me why there was a special supply of dog food required, please do let me know. One journey was made by the Thurso lifeboat. I'm sure there were several journeys made by the Thurso lifeboat, but one particular journey to Port Skerra and Skerra is recorded as thus: conveying provisions but unable to land same owing to stormy weather. Urgent medical supplies, insulin, etc., thrown from lifeboat to quay at Port Skerra at considerable risk to lifeboat and crew. So you can picture them in this lifeboat in these torrential winds and rains, trying to throw these medical supplies onto the land to make sure people have what they need. Some big, frightening situations to be involved in. But speaking of that medication, there's a really interesting lot of information about the medical situation during the snowstorms. And if you remember, alien to many of us, I'm sure, in the UK, that this is only 7 years into the establishment of the NHS. So the NHS had been established in 1948. This is 1955. And so we're only just a few years into the routine and the system of the NHS. Dunbar Hospital in Thurso was completely cut off from the rest of Thurso for 2 days. There are examples within those lists of sorties and journeys made of medical specific journeys. So the surgeon and the anaesthetist from Wick were flown from Wick to Thurso to perform an emergency operation. And I think it's hard for us to imagine now the conditions being so severe that you have to fly a doctor from Wick to Thurso. It's really interesting, and I find it just a huge tribute to the amount of work involved, that every patient who needed medical treatment got to hospital on the day that they put their request in, apart from one person, and the reason for that was that the weather was so severe that the helicopter couldn't land to pick them up, but they made it to hospital the next day. I just found that absolutely extraordinary in those conditions, that they got everybody to hospital on the day of the request, apart from that one person, and even that person was only 1 day late. There were also doctors flown from hospitals to people's houses, and there was one mention of there was an elderly man who absolutely refused to go near a helicopter. He just not going in the helicopter, and so the doctors were flown to him instead. And there's I've read some extracts from the police, from the county council, and this is an extract from the medical officer of health. And he noted after the whole thing was over that even seriously ill patients appeared to suffer very little disturbance from their journey by helicopter, and 1 or 2 patients who would have had little chance of survival if the helicopter had not been available. The others were saved a great deal of discomfort and worry, and I have no hesitation in saying that the helicopter service for medical cases was well worthwhile, and that similar arrangements should be considered for any future emergency. Which is interesting because, of course, to those of us who live in the Highlands and also in any other remote communities, you'll know that the air ambulance is still so absolutely vital to us and has saved so many lives. There's also an extract from Cameron Sutherland, who was the county roads surveyor, and he wrote in his report that the situation was completely back under control by the 26th of January. All of the roads were cleared and things were under control. And it had taken some days to recover the snowplows. I hate the irony of this. It took them some days to uncover the snowplows which had been snowed in. So they had to dig out their snowplows before they could then use them. On the 22nd of January, a Ministry of Transport plough arrived from Ayrshire. It cleared the A9 on the way north. So imagine having to get a plough from Ayrshire to the other end of the country, nearly, to be able to support them. And so it cleared the A9 on its way north, and then it spent 3 days going round Caithness and then went home again. And the roads surveyor also noted that the machines, these snowplows, were great for getting through soft snow. Absolutely brilliant, he says, but when the snow becomes frozen, the only option was hand cutting. And I just find that extraordinary when you bear in mind that these snow drifts are up to 9 metres or 30 feet tall, and he's saying the only way we could deal with some of them was to hand cut them. So by the 26th, things had eased and the situation had gone back to normal. The support of the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force was gradually reduced, and people, all those things started to go back to normal. But it was a huge occasion, and as I'm seeing your comments coming in, amazing community support, amazing team effort of the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force, the County Council, the police, the medical profession, all sorts of people trying to pull together to get through it. I think it's easy now for us to think, I think if you were a child it would have been super exciting, but I think it also must have been quite frightening to not have, we look at it now and we would have that advantage of probably we would have known the storm was coming, we would have, had all that kind of interaction with each other in the build up to it and throughout it as well. And I think that's one of the things that appears through all of these reports is an acknowledgement of what a difference it's made to have a phone call, to have the ability to communicate with each other. Let me see if I have. They talk about what a difference radio messages have made, and the fact that they can telegram each other has made it, they were able to be in communication with each other more quickly than they had expected. So yeah, I think it's a really wonderful example of people coming together, groups, organisations, individuals coming together to overcome something that had affected the whole community. And both the county council, the county clerk and the chief constable throughout these reports give such effusive thanks to all the people who made it possible, which, as again, is quite relevant. I hope you've enjoyed that. I feel like I was a wee bit stuttery. Like I say, it's been a bit of a week, so please forgive me. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do go and have a look at the Nucleus Facebook page for more information about this story. And also there will be a blog going onto the Nucleus website as well, which will contain extracts from these reports and newspaper cuttings and all sorts of other things. So please do go and have a look at that. I hope you can join me next week. Next week, providing no other catastrophes happen in my life, next week we'll be looking at Fort William in the 40s, 50s and 60s. So hopefully you'll have some memories to share with that as well. A reminder as I head away that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, that High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part. But thank you for the donations that you've been able to give to do so, then we very much appreciate that. Thank you for all your messages coming in, and thank you for so many people joining me. It was really lovely to see you all. Thanks.